My name is John. I am a cybersecurity professional. I work in
Oh,
offensive cybersecurity. I spent 10 years in the Canadian Army where I was doing sort of signals intelligence cyber warfare stuff. I've left the Army and now I work in the private sector. And one of the reasons that I'm here is because I do an enormous amount of research on autistic Christians and ex-Christians, and your community has come up an enormous amount in my researching journeys. And so I just wanted to talk to you and
oh,
have a
I,
discussion.
you pitched well. You hooked me. Say more about
Yeah.
what you just said.
Yeah, so I basically started a research project into autism and Christianity back in 2014 when I was raised as a conservative evangelical. I mean, I say conservative evangelical. It's Mennonite Brethren, but most people don't know what Mennonite Brethren means. So I just tell them conservative evangelical because it's close enough. The joke MB stands for mostly Baptist. So we were in the mostly Baptist camp. I obviously wasn't a particularly good Mennonite because I joined the army when I was age 18. And so, you know, I guess the Mennonite stuff didn't hold, but the conservative evangelical stuff definitely did. But then I left. But then I deconstructed and I left the faith when I was 19. And I found a whole bunch of other autistic people while I was at university at the Royal Military College of Canada. It's really close to Queen's University. And so there was a meetup for autistic people at Queen's, and I showed up and I started talking to a lot of them, and I started realizing, wow, we all have almost identical deconversion stories. This is really weird. And I thought, is this a trend? Like, is this an autism thing? Or is this something else? Or have I just stumbled upon a weird sequence of people that like, is this just a weird coincidence? So I started looking up the research online, and I found that the research generally pointed to autistic people being less likely to be Christian. And the reasons they gave I found were deeply unsatisfying, and I just intuitively didn't think they were correct. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll do this myself. So I basically started. So I'm a computer engineer, very good at building bots to scrape web applications, very good at doing data analysis, data processing, very good at sort of data analysis and all the things that come with it, and using computers to do that on a mass scale. And so I started doing that and just basically finding any autistic people on the internet posting about either Christianity or leaving Christianity and compiling all their things they were saying. And I've been doing that for basically 10 years over a long stretch of time. And about 2 years into that data collection, I realized I wasn't getting, you can only get so much information from just reading a person's posts,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
like that from passive data collect, you can only get so much, and you can't get deep into it, right? So you get a lot of you get a mile wide and inch deep, and I wanted to get a lot deeper and just figure things out. So I just started cold emailing or messaging these people that I was identifying, saying, hey, I'm an independent autism researcher. I'm looking into autism and Christianity. Do you want to do a long form interview with me? And then some of the times they would say yes, some of the times they would say no, but then I'd just do a long form interview. And so at this point, I have identified 26,000, more than 26,000 autistic Christians and ex Christians across the internet. And I've done long form interviews with over 500, and had conversations, like not recorded formal interviews, conversations. I don't know how many I've had, like probably over 800 at this point with different autistics. And so my whole project is figuring this out. So figuring out why it is that the numbers appear that autistic people are less likely to participate in Christianity, at least in the English speaking West. And then two, now that I've figured that out, um, how do autistic Christians actually practice their faith? And I can't remember exactly what year you and your community came onto my radar. It either late 2010s or early 2020s when I started seeing a lot of young men start to organize and gravitate around Jordan Peterson, and then the other people around Jordan Peterson, like John Vervaeke, and you know, I'm sure
Jonathan
you know
Peugeot.
exactly
Yep.
who.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
yeah, all those guys. And then your community started popping up, and started, I'm always looking for good data to mine, good sources to find,
My
people
community gives
having, yeah,
data. We give it
yeah,
freely.
yeah,
You
yeah,
want to watch? You want to watch YouTube content? TLC will provide.
yeah, exactly. And so just like long form conversations, people I suspect are autistic, people who I don't know are autistic, seeing just, okay, what are they saying, and how are they saying it, and how are they interacting with these things. And so yeah, that's basically why I wanted to talk to you, because I thought, this is interesting, because I see a lot of autistic people go into your space and then leave your space, and some stay, and it's yeah, there are a lot of interesting dynamics there. And I thought, especially, I think your community would probably be interested in a lot of my
Yes.
research as well. I think like one of the things that I want to try to communicate to people is just, one thing I do that I find Christians often get wrong is misunderstanding deconstruction and why it happens, and like, why do autistic people actually leave Christianity. And I think that
And
is,
defining what that means, because
yeah. So when I say deconstruction, I mean deconversion.
they
I
they
mean, like,
they stop going to church, they stop identifying as Christians,
yeah,
they stop certain Christian practices, because those are sort of three things that you
yeah.
can sort of point to
So
easily.
I would say all three of them combined.
Yes.
Basically, they just fully opt out. That's what I would call deconstruction,
Yeah.
when they pull themselves out of that. And
even
so,
even if their formation, probably within a Christian family and a Christian church, even
yeah,
though their formation is deeply Christian, and which means that so many of the impulses and their moral imaginary, all of these things are deeply formed by Christianity,
yeah,
even if they don't necessarily practice classic Christian behaviors, they don't identify as Christian, they don't participate in specifically Christian practices, something like that.
yeah, yeah. And so, like, I don't think anyone fully extricates themselves from Christianity. If you're living in the West, you are, whether willingly or not, embedded in the mesh of Christianity. And for better or worse, I think there are some good things that come about, and some probably not so good things that come about from that as well. But yeah, so this was a question I looked at a lot, because just figuring out why is fairly hard. So there was one big paper that came out that got referenced a lot when I started looking into this. It was called, "Do Mentalizing Deficits Constrain a Belief in a Personal God?" And the idea,
Hey, I got to write that one down here. Do
yeah,
mentalizing deficits constrain a belief in a personal God?
yes. So it was a research paper that looked at autistic people and non-autistic people, and then controlled for theory of mind, or supposedly controlled for theory of mind. They looked for, and theory of mind is your ability to intuitively understand another person's emotional state.
Right.
And the idea is that autistic people are worse at that than their non-autistic counterparts. And the thinking of the people in the paper is that if autistic people are worse at this, the reason we're less likely to be Christian is because we're less likely to be good at, like, conceptualizing God as an independent mind from ourselves, that has feelings and thoughts and things towards us.
Right.
So
Right.
maybe that's the reason that people are less likely to be Christian. But I read that and I thought, that doesn't seem intuitively right to me. Like, that
Mhm.
was never a problem with Christianity for me. My problems were the doctrinal aspects, they were the social aspects, they were the relational aspects, and like the way things were communicated to me. And especially looking back at it, I think like a really big issue is just no one knew how to talk to me. No one knew how to communicate things to me in a way I would understand. And what I got was a form of Christianity, right? Not Christianity a specific form of Christianity that was mostly designed for people who don't think like me, who don't like process like me, who aren't interested in thinking about things that the way I'm interested in thinking of. And I thought, I think that probably has more to do with it. But again, at the time I couldn't prove it. And so what I did is I just found a lot of ex-Christian autistics and I asked them, "Hey, why'd you leave?" And they gave me a lot of answers. And so I very varied, right? Like all over the place, all over the map. And I was thinking, well, how do I actually properly conceptualize this? And so what I started to realize is one common thread running through all these different testimonies and all these different anecdotes that I was collecting is mental strain and mental pressure. And I started to realize what they're describing, whether they know it or not, is cognitive dissonance,
Yep.
right? They are describing they got overwhelmed by cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they left.
Yeah. And that, in
And
my
that's
opinion,
basic.
that's super common in terms of why people leave.
Yep.
It's cognitive dissonance. Yeah.
Yep. And so then I thought, okay, but everyone gets cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah.
Like this is not an autism specific
Preachers
phenomenon.
provoke cognitive dissonance in sermons intentionally.
Yes. Yes, it is a normal thing that everyone experiences. So why is it happening with autistic people? And what I sort of found is that autistic people just at a baseline have significantly less capacity for cognitive dissonance. So if I call it the cognitive dissonance pressure cooker. So the model I use is think of a pressure cooker. The pressure vessel for autistic people is just smaller, so they can handle less cognitive dissonance.
Yep.
And then you look at, okay, what causes cognitive dissonance? And there are all sorts of causes of cognitive dissonance. But for autistic people, because of the way we think about things, because of the way we interact with people, because of the social challenges that come with autism, like a lot of us really struggle to understand other people's intentions, their thoughts. We miss social cues. We don't understand what people are trying to communicate to us. A lot of us deal with a lot of confusion and a lot of difficulty with that. We go, okay, so there's now not only do we have a smaller pressure tank, but the things that cause cognitive dissonance, there's just more opportunities for autistic people.
Absolutely.
And then I looked at another factor, which is, well, what happens when cognitive dissonance gets caused? Like, how much does something increase pressure in the pressure tank? And I started looking at autistic people and then comparing them to other ex-Christian communities that weren't autistic. And I joined a lot of ex-Christian like Facebook pages and subreddits and heard a lot of testimonies, read a lot, and I started to realize the things that cause autistic people cognitive dissonance cause us way more than it does the average person. And so when you look at something like contradictions in the Bible,
Yeah.
that causes autistic people significant amounts of cognitive dissonance, and just like small things, right? Because we're very detail oriented. We care about the little details. It's very hard for us to let those things go. And we obsess about them in ways that most people don't. And so a really common example that I hear cited, and one that I think is interesting, is when you look at the genealogies in Matthew and Luke. They're different lists of names, right?
Yep.
Like this,
Yep.
this is
Yep.
uncontroversial.
Yep.
You put the two lists together.
Yep.
At some point, they diverge.
Yep.
And they both say they're coming from Joseph, right? And you really have four options with that, right? So you think either both of them are somehow correct, one of them's correct, and the other's not. You know, Matthew's right, Luke's not. Luke is right, Matthew's not, or neither of them are correct. And you think, how do I solve this problem? How do I prove which one is correct? And you can't, right? There's no way to prove it. And especially with like a hyper systematizer mind, like a hard empiricist, hard left brain, I need to figure this out. I need to drill down into this and solve this problem. when you can't solve the problem, what's that going to do to you?
Right.
Versus someone who can adopt a more live and let live model,
Yep.
or
Yep.
a maybe there's an answer out there but I don't understand it yet. Usually not satisfying for autistic people. And so like the things that cause us cognitive dissonance cause us a lot more than most people. And then there, like, a really big thing with autistic people is a lot of us get really mad and really frustrated at hypocrisy and dishonesty and things like that. And it's,
Yeah.
if you know autistic people, you'll know like a lot of us freak out about that stuff. Like, I, you know, I got a lot of nicknames growing up around the fact that I would constantly freak out around these sorts of things. Because I mean, I didn't like it and I hated it. And within Christianity, there are lots of opportunities to feel that way, right? And there are lots of things that will cause you to feel that way. And so just you have smaller pressure tank. More things cause pressure. The things that cause pressure cause more pressure. And then you think, okay, well, surely there's a release valve for this, right? Surely somewhere on the pressure tank there needs to be a button that the church can press or the people in the church can press that will release steam and
Right.
lower the pressure.
Right.
And so you look at this and like you look at all the techniques that the church has developed to alleviate cognitive dissonance. And then you look, how effective are these for autistic people? And they're significantly less effective. And
Yeah.
so, you know, like the one very common thing that I found with autistic people is a lot of us really deeply struggle with the relational aspects of Christianity and the
Yeah.
relational language
Yep.
because we think about relationships so differently. It's a misconception that we don't form relationships, that we don't think relationally. That's not the case. We do. We just think of relationships in a completely different category than most people do. And so when you are adopting language about relationships that you find alien to you, you know, you say, okay, I have all these issues with reading the Bible that I can't solve, but I have this personal relationship with Jesus that I know to be true. That helps to relieve your cognitive dissonance. But a lot of autistic people don't have that thing to grab onto. And so we turn often to apologetics, right? Apologetics is extreme. Like it, I just did an episode about the weird relationship between autistic people and apologetics. A lot of us have an apologetics phase where we get really into apologetics.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of us have like a Calvinist phase where we get really
Yeah.
into
Yeah. Yeah.
Calvinism if we're
Yeah.
Protestant.
Because
Um,
Calvinism can just shortcut a whole bunch of dissonance.
oh yeah,
It's got
yeah.
certain mechanisms to just bang, you just shortcut
This
that
is the
dissonance.
answer. This is the Bible verse. Solved.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, so a lot of us get into Calvinism, a lot of us get into like being tradcats,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
most of us though, regardless of the denomination, get really into apologetics and really into proving Christianity. And this ends up being a sort of double-edged sword because you quickly find out as you start getting more into it, the answers get less satisfying, and you start realizing, oh, there's actually genuine complexity here that I wasn't super prepared for. It's very, very common to hear autistic people talk about that they felt betrayed by apologetics
Oh,
because
oh, interesting.
they felt that these guys had the answers to me. And again, we're like hyper left brain, right? Like
A lot of people in the
extreme
corner in that bucket.
systematizers. Yeah,
Yeah.
extreme systematizers,
Yeah.
extreme heavy analytical people, and we need to have like the right answer to resolve this. And like this was 100% me. I mean, still is to a large degree. And so when you don't have that right answer, that cognitive dissonance doesn't go away. In fact, it usually increases. And so for a lot of people, they listen to apologetics and they read evidence that demands a verdict or the case for Christ, and they go, whew, this is great. I'm justified in my belief. I'm not an idiot. A lot of autistic people encounter those texts and they go, oh no, this is our best defense. Oh, this is bad. And that causes even more things. And so the pressure release valve on the cognitive dissonance tank is less effective because the mechanisms that Christianity has built up and developed around relieving cognitive dissonance are not built to relieve autistic people's cognitive dissonance. They're meant to relieve non-autistic people's cognitive dissonance, and they think very differently from us. It's not a bad thing or a good thing. It's just a different thing, right? You're dealing with, in many cases, apples and oranges. And while autistic people are still people, and we respond to many of the same incentives that other people do, we have some unique cognitive styles and ways of thinking about things that lend to the techniques that most people find effective for alleviating that cognitive dissonance to just be significantly less effective. And eventually that pressure just builds up, right? It becomes too strong in that tank. And one of two things happen. Either it becomes too strong for too long, that you just say, I can't handle the mental load anymore, and you just pull yourself away from it. And when you pull yourself away from it, you start to feel the cognitive dissonance resolve, and you go back, and then it increases, and then you come out and it resolves, and you go back and you cycle in, and then you start thinking, why am I going back? Like, why am I subjecting myself to this? And so that's one option. But the more common one is usually something knocks the tank over and it explodes. And it gets very messy very quick. Everything goes everywhere. And it's like a rapid, unscheduled disassembly. So that's what happened with me. It was a pretty rapid disassembly. And again, I was very systematic in my Christian thinking. I had everything lined up, everything interconnected, everything works well, like this beautiful pocket watch where everything works. And then like a tiny grain of sand gets into it, the pocket watch breaks. It's like, okay, now what do I do? And then basically I couldn't deal with it anymore. And it just kind of exploded everywhere and I left. And so when you're looking at why are autistic people less likely to be Christian, it's just like that's it basically. Right?
That makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense.